Deliverance Redefined. Exodus 8:1. Let my people go, that they may serve me. There is a misunderstanding that has quietly shaped modern belief. A misunderstanding about deliverance, a misunderstanding about freedom, and ultimately a misunderstanding about our relationship with Yah. Deliverance was never about independence. It was about right service. And the reason this matters is because most people, without realizing it, define freedom the way that Pharaoh would have defined it. Pharaoh's version of freedom is, no one tells me what to do, no one governs me, no one has claim over me. But that is not kingdom definition of freedom. That definition is actually the seed of rebellion. Because from the beginning, mankind was never designed to be independent. We were designed to be governed by Yah. We were designed to live under His authority. We were designed to receive His instruction, walk in it, and bear fruit through it. So when Yah delivered Yasharel from Mitzrayim, He was not removing the concept of master. He was correcting the master. He was not saying, let them go so they can belong to themselves. He was saying, let them go because they belong to me. That's why Exodus 8:1 is so revealing. Because Yah could have said, let my people go so they can be free. But He did not. He said, let my people go that they may serve me. That means deliverance is not primarily a rescue mission. It is a restoration of order. Deliverance is the act of Yah removing a person from illegitimate authority and placing them back under rightful authority. So the real question is not, have I been delivered? The real question is, who do I serve now? Because everyone serves something or someone. If it is not Pharaoh, it will be something else. If it is not Egypt, it will be self. If it is not self, it will be sin. If it is not sin, it will be appetite, comfort, approval, money, pride, something. And that is why independence is a trap. Independence sounds like freedom, but it usually becomes self-rule. And self-rule is not neutral. Self-rule is how we quietly replace Yah on the throne while still using His name. So deliverance is not, I'm free to do what I want. Deliverance is, I've been released from what I was never meant to serve, so I can serve the one I was created for. This is why people get frustrated after awakening, because awakening exposes Egypt. But if deliverance does not lead wholly to serving Yah, the person comes out of Egypt and wanders in a wilderness of self-service. They leave Pharaoh, but they do not enter covenant. They get free from bondage, but they do not get free from themselves. And the proof is in what happens next. If deliverance is real, it produces a new allegiance. Not just new information, not just new vocabulary, not just new anger at the system, but a new allegiance. So deliverance is not independence. Deliverance is transfer. Transfer of ownership, transfer of obedience, transfer of worship, transfer of service, transfer of allegiance from Pharaoh to Yah. Deliverance restores right service. Many people believe deliverance means freedom from authority, freedom from resistance or restraint, freedom from obedience, freedom to define life on their own terms. But Scripture never teaches that. The New Testament confirms what Exodus already established. Romans 6:15-19. What then? Shall we sin because we are not under the law, but under grace? By no means. Do you not know that if you present yourselves to anyone as obedient servants, you are servants of the one whom you obey, either of sin, which leads to death, or of obedience, which leads to righteousness? But thanks be to Elohim, that you, who were once slaves of sin, have become obedient from the heart to the standard of teaching to which you were committed, and having been set free from sin, have become servants of righteousness. Freedom in the kingdom is not the absence of a master. Freedom is being restored to the right one. So grace does not remove the yoke. Grace removes the wrong yoke, the hard one, and replaces it with the right one, which is easy. Because Scripture never teaches a yokeless life. It teaches a changed yoke. Yahushua himself said in Matthew 11:29-30, "Take my yoke upon you and learn of me, for I am meek and lowly in heart, and ye shall find rest unto your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." Notice what he did not say. He did not say, "Come to me and I will remove all yokes." He said, "Take my yoke upon you," which tells us something essential. Grace does not free us from being governed. Grace frees us from being governed by what crushes us. Sin has a yoke. Self has a yoke. Religion has a yoke. Pharaoh had a yoke. And every one of them is heavy. Grace removes the yoke that destroys and replaces it with the yoke that restores. The yoke of Yahushua is easy, not because it has no demand, but because it is aligned with how we were designed to live. So grace does not remove service. Grace redeems service. It redeems service from fear, from striving, from punishment, from bondage, and restores it to learning from Him, walking with Him, being governed by Him. That is why grace brings rest, not rebellion. If grace has removed all restraint in someone's life, that grace is not from Yah, because true grace always places us under the right yoke. If deliverance restores right service, then redemption must restore right ownership. Because you cannot say Yah is your Redeemer and refuse Him ownership of your life. The one who redeems owns. This is not opinion, this is covenant law. In Scripture, redemption is not emotional language, it is legal language. And that's why the picture of the kinsman redeemer matters. In Ruth 4, Boaz redeems Ruth, but notice what happens. He does not simply rescue her situation. He takes responsibility for her future. He brings her under his covering. He assumes legal authority, provision, and direction. Redemption establishes rightful claim. So when we say Yahushua is our Redeemer, we are not saying He merely rescued us from trouble. We are saying He has rightful claim over our lives. That is why Scripture says you are not your own, not to strip identity, but to restore it. Because if Yahushua redeemed you, you do not belong to yourself anymore. And that is not loss, that is safety. This is where many people stop too early. They say, Yahushua redeemed me from the curse of the law. But Scripture does not stop there. Galatians 3:13-14. Messiah has redeemed us from the curse of the law, being made a curse for us, that the blessing of Abraham might come on the Gentiles through Yahushua Messiah, that we might receive the promise of the Ruach through faith. So the question must be asked, redeemed from the curse, for what purpose? The answer is not autonomy. The answer is the Ruach. Because the Ruach is what empowers obedience. The same Ruach that lived in Yahusha and enabled him to do the perfect will of the Father is the Ruach given to us. That is grace. Grace is not the removal of expectation. Grace is the empowerment to obey. Which is why Yahusha said plainly in John 14:15, if you love me, keep my commandments. Not as a threat, not as a burden, but as the natural response of one who belongs. So we deceive ourselves when we say we have been redeemed, but we neglect to serve in obedience the Redeemer. We deceive ourselves when we say we are under grace, but we resist obedience to Yah's instructions. Because redemption without submission is not redemption at all. It is self-rule using holy language. You cannot say Yahusha is your Redeemer and deny him lordship of your life. Because the one who redeems owns, and those who belong obey, not out of fear, but out of restored relationship. So if grace places us under the right yoke and redemption restores rightful ownership, then belief that does not produce alignment is exposed for what it truly is. And that brings us to the final test. Even demons believe. One of the most misunderstood things in modern belief is the idea that being saved means we no longer follow Yah's instructions. But scripture says otherwise. 1 Corinthians 6:19-20. Do you not know that your body is the temple of the Ruach HaKodesh within you, whom you have from Elohim? You are not your own, for you were bought with a price. Therefore glorify Elohim in your body. The price paid was not permission to redefine our lives. It was the cost of restoration. And this is where many people unknowingly go off course. Because when people hear that a price was paid, they assume the payment purchased freedom of self-definition. But scripture never teaches that. When something is redeemed, it is not reimagined, it is restored. Redemption does not create a new design. Redemption returns something to its original purpose. So when Yahusha paid the price, he was not saying you are now free to decide who you want to be. He was saying you are now free to become who you were created to be. That distinction matters because redefining our lives assumes we know better than the one who designed them. But restoration assumes the original design was good and the deviation was the problem. Sin did not destroy Yah's design. It corrupted our alignment to it. So the cross was not about innovation. It was about recovery. Recovery of purpose, recovery of order, recovery of function. That's why redemption always points backward before it moves forward. It points us back to covenant, back to obedience, back to alignment, back to walking with Yah. If redemption were permission to redefine life, then there would be no need for the law, Yah's instruction, to be written in our hearts and on our minds. If redemption were permission to choose our own way, then the life of Yahusha would be irrelevant. And yet he taught us plainly in John 14:6, Yahusha saith unto him, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man cometh unto the Father but by me. Which means redemption does not eliminate direction. It establishes it. Redemption does not authorize self-definition. It restores us to the way. The price paid was not permission to negotiate life on our terms. It was the cost of restoration, restoring us back to covenant order, back to obedience, back to alignment with the will of Yah. Scripture says he came to restore what was lost, not to affirm what was broken. The cost was paid to repair what sin damaged, and restoration always involves submission to original order. When a house is restored, it is brought back to its intended structure. When a body is restored, it is brought back to proper function. When life is restored, it is brought back under the authority of its creator. So the price paid was not permission to negotiate terms with Yah. It was the cost required to bring us back under his rightful authority without condemnation. That's grace. Grace does not excuse misalignment. Grace makes realignment possible. Grace does not celebrate deviation. Grace corrects it. Grace does not say, live however you want. I paid for it. Grace says you were bought back so you could finally live right. And this is why obedience is not optional for the redeemed. Not because obedience saves us, but because restoration demands it. Because you cannot be restored and remain misaligned. You cannot be redeemed and continue redefining yourself. Restoration always leads back to the will of the one who restored you. So if the price paid was the cost of restoration, not permission for redefinition, then the question is no longer, what do I believe? The question becomes, am I aligned with what I was restored to? We were not reclaimed so we could do as we please. We were bought back because we already belonged to him and therefore are called to obey him. Grace does not cancel accountability. Grace establishes it on the right foundation. This is why scripture says in Hebrews 8:10, for this is the covenant that I will make with the house of Yasharel after those days, saith Yahuwah. I will put my laws into their mind and write them in their hearts, and I will be to them an Elohim, and they shall be to me a people. Obedience was never removed. It was relocated, written on the heart, lived out through obedience and alignment. To be redeemed is to be rightly owned by Yah. And that ownership is not bondage. It is alignment. It is protection. It is life. But belief alone does not sustain that life. Belief must produce alignment. Belief without alignment does not grant access to the kingdom. Many people believe, many confess, many agree with truth. But agreement is not obedience. And obedience flowing from true faith is the key that grants access to the kingdom. Scripture makes this plain. James 2:19-20. You believe that there is one Elohim, you do well. Even the demons believe and tremble. But do you want to know, O foolish man, that faith without works is dead? Even demons believe and tremble. That single sentence removes every illusion people try to hide behind. Belief by itself is not evidence of faith. Demons believe. They believe Elohim exists. They believe he is powerful. They believe he is righteous. They believe he will judge, and they tremble. Which means belief can exist without obedience, without submission, without alignment. So belief cannot be the definition of faith. This is where many people misunderstand James. James is not insulting believers. He is defining reality. When scripture says faith without works is dead, it is not making an accusation. It is making a diagnosis. Dead things do not move. Dead things do not respond. Dead things do not obey. So when belief does not result in alignment, it reveals that faith was never alive in the first place. That is not condemnation. That is clarity. Because biblical faith is not mental agreement. Biblical faith is a living faith, and it governs behavior. Faith is not what you say you believe. Faith is what you live in response to what you believe. Demons believe the truth, but they do not yield to it. They do not submit. They do not obey. They do not align, which means belief alone does not bring you into covenant relationship. Alignment does. And the kingdom is sustained by obedience, which leads to alignment. This is why obedience is not optional evidence. Not because obedience earns salvation, but because obedience proves surrender. Where there is faith, there is submission. Where there is submission, there is alignment. And where there is alignment, there is fruit. James is not saying add works to your faith. He is saying if faith is real, works will already be there. Because living faith moves the body. Dead faith does not. So when people say, I believe, but resist obedience, when they say, I have faith, but reject Yah's instructions, when they say, I am under grace, but refuse alignment, James gives us the answer. The faith is not underdeveloped. It is dead. Not because someone judged it, but because it produces no life. And this is why the kingdom is not sustained by belief alone, but by our obedience, which leads us in alignment to Yah's kingdom. Because alignment places us under the right authority. Alignment keeps us under the right yoke. Alignment keeps us walking in restored order. Belief acknowledges truth. Alignment submits to it. And that is the difference between the kingdom and everything else. So the question is not, do I believe? Even demons believe. The question is, does what I believe align my life under the authority of Yah? Because faith that does not align is not immature faith, it is dead faith. And living faith always endeavors to obey. Again, even demons believe, but they do not obey. They do not submit. They do not align. Remember, belief alone has never been the evidence of faith. Faith is proven by obedience, and Scripture confirms this. Hebrews 11:6. But without faith, it is impossible to please him. For he that cometh to Elohim must believe that he is, and that he is a rewarder of them that diligently seek him. Alignment is how belief becomes alive. The kingdom is not sustained by what we say we believe, but by how we live in response to that belief and our obedience to it. Truth that does not govern us does not transform us. If belief does not lead to alignment, it remains unfruitful, and unfruitful faith cannot enter the kingdom. This is not about information, it is about order. Deliverance restored service, redemption restored ownership, alignment reveals faith. So now, pause and ask Yah these 3 questions. 1. Have I treated my freedom in Yahusha as a call to wholly serve your will or permission to quietly justify my own? 2. What areas of my life am I still governing myself instead of submitting to your authority? And 3. What does my daily life reveal about what I truly believe? May we not only believe the truth, but live aligned with it. Shalom.